Professors Elsie Stern and Daniel Fisher-Livney, the editors of the New Reformed Torah commentary that we will pilot tomorrow morning, marvel at the disparate stories in this week's portion. Avraham challenges God when Adonai plans to destroy all of Sodom for the sins of some. He negotiates a deal with Avimelech, a neighboring king, to secure rights to a well. Then God commands him to sacrifice his son Isaac, and Abraham prepares to do so. Stern and Fisher-Livney suspect that the three stories developed separately and were put together by a later editor, perhaps to paint a picture of Abraham's character. His challenge to the intended destruction of Sodom demonstrates his moral courage. His negotiations with Avimelech at Beersheba demonstrate his political savvy. And the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, his near sacrifice of Yitzchak, demonstrates his piety. Last week in Israel, representing Artsenu, the Global Federation of Reform Movement Zionists, at the World Zionist Congress, attending ordination of our newest Israeli Reform rabbis at Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, and celebrating Shabbat with Rabbi Ayala Miron and the community of Congregation Bavat Ayin, I witnessed the morality articulated by Reform and Israeli and diaspora Jews alongside our allies in the conservative movement, as well as like-minded secular, Reconstructionist, and progressive Orthodox Jews. The awe-inspiring negotiating skill of Reform movement leaders, and the faith that drives us all. As you doubtless noticed when I urged you to vote Reform in the World Zionist Congress elections in the spring, the role of this gathering is poorly understood and hard to explain. Now I can do a little better. First, a large portion of the land in Israel is owned by Kakal, translated as the Jewish National Fund, though it's entirely separate from JNF in North America. Kakal holds all that land in trust for the Jewish people, and it has the responsibility to develop that land for our collective welfare. Kakal's leadership is elected and its policy is established by the Congress. Moreover, the Congress determines how money collected for the benefit of Israel and Zionism worldwide is and ought to be spent, and ought not to be spent. For example, last week at the Congress, the Reform delegation and our allies prevailed to forbid any of the institutions under the Congress's control from providing support to Jewish civilian occupation of Gaza or in the part of the West Bank known as E1, where settlements are proposed expressly for the purpose of making any future creation of a Palestinian state geographically untenable. Those actions have direct consequences. The Israeli government would be at pains to build settlements without funding from these long, dependable sources. Throughout a contentious plenary, our delegation and its allies were consistently victorious. We addressed the rights of Jews who wish to worship in their accustomed style, people of all ages and genders together at the Kotel, the western wall of Jerusalem's Temple Mount, in a separate section designed for that purpose. In 2018, a stone fell from the wall, from that portion of the Kotel. Nobody was hurt, but understandably that caused that section of the Kotel to be closed while repairs were made to ensure safety. That work was completed within 6 months, but without explanation, access to that part of the Kotel, the egalitarian Kotel, continues to be denied 7 years later. We know the reason: discrimination against religious Jews like us who are not Orthodox. The Congress demanded that our ability to touch the Kotel again be restored forthwith. These initiatives suggest criticism of the way that Israelis run their country. You have heard me, too, call out Israeli injustices, something that most but not all of our congregation can understand as criticism out of love. After all, I also speak with pride about my family in Israel and about my Israeli rabbinic colleagues, some of whom you have been privileged to meet. Still, it's also true that much criticism of Israel comes from those who seek to brand Israel as somehow uniquely evil among the nations of the world. At its worst, Israel hardly compares to oppressive regimes from China to Sudan, North Korea to Iran, and Russia to Venezuela, many of which go unchastised by Israel's sharpest critics. Rabbi David Kimchi addressed that moral relativism in his interpretation of Abraham's rhetorical question to Adonai about the proposed destruction of Sodom. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? Kimchi says that Abraham mentions all the earth to insist that God apply an equal standard to injustice wherever it is found, not only in the land of Israel. When people gather as Zionists, though, as supporters of the Jewish right of self-determination in Israel, we have not only a right, but a responsibility, like Abraham's, to demand justice in a nation founded on a Torah that demands tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. If Abraham can have the chutzpah to demand that Adonai be righteous, surely by extension we may demand the same of our Jewish state. I went to the Congress above all to live out my partnership with our Israeli reform movement. Members of Maram, Israel's reform rabbis, are my teachers and inspiration. For 2.5 years, they have raised the voice of Jewish morals in Israel's public square, leading public Havdalah ceremonies, setting a spiritual tone, stunningly embraced by throngs of supposedly secular Israelis who are gathered for demonstrations that demand the protection of democracy and fairness for every citizen of Israel and for Palestinians living under Israel's control. What I did not expect when I went to the Congress was to be successful. Yes, our reform delegation was the largest from the United States, larger still when we joined with the conservative movement. Still, the combined strength of anti-Zionist, ultra-Orthodox, and far-right Zionist parties outweighed ours. Like Abraham making a pact with Avimelech to secure his well, the leaders of our delegation demonstrated extraordinary skill, making alliances, even strange ones, without ever abandoning our moral vision. In the words of the senior rabbi of a large congregation in a neighboring state of ours, I thought we were sitting Shiva after the election. But we're not just winning here, it's a beatdown. 40 years ago, when I was a first-year rabbinical student in Jerusalem, there was much talk about a program to train Israelis to be Reform rabbis. But fewer than a handful had been ordained, and another handful were in the pipeline. When we visited a Reform congregation, the prayers were in Hebrew, but the instructions were also given in English, and the dinner table discussion was entirely in English, and not for our benefit. The congregants' accents were American and Australian, British and South African. In those days, it would have been hard to imagine a day like I had last Friday, when at the service before the ordination of Israeli Reform rabbis, the Hebrew Union College was full to overflowing. While nobody present would embrace a piety that leads a man to sacrifice, to bind his son for sacrifice. Indeed, one of the newly ordained rabbis spoke out for a Torah without the binding story. Their faith is clear. An increasing number of Israeli Reform rabbis serve communities that they have created with support from the Israel movement for progressive Judaism. These rabbis serve entire regions with multiple smaller communities, mostly kibbutzim and moshavim in the north and south of the country. One of the women ordained last Friday, my friend Rabbi Yael Shvaid, is the first rabbi for the Eshkol Regional Council. That name won't ring a bell until I tell you that among its communities are Be'eri, Nir Oz, and Nir Yitzchak, kibbutzim that were massacred by Hamas on October 7th. Imagine the faith required to go serve devastated communities that never had thought that they needed a rabbi. They call themselves secular, after all. There will be days when Rabbi Shvaid may think she has accepted a call, l'chilach. Get up and go to pass some horrific test of faith, like God's call to Abraham to sacrifice his son. Instead of wood and a butcher's knife, Rabbi Shvaid will take her synagogue in the trunk of her car. A Torah, Sidurim, prayer books, and other holy books. And on most days, though, her piety will be like Abraham's and Sarai's, when God called, Lech Lecha, get up and go to a land of promise. And there, like so many children of Abraham and Sarah before her, Rabbi Shvaid will make the desert bloom with words of Torah. Amen.